You're standing in your kitchen late at night, the house is dark, and the only sound is that low hum coming from the corner. That's your fridge, running, right now. It has never once stopped since the day you plugged it in. Here's what I want you to understand tonight. You can keep your milk, your butter, your meat, your eggs, and your greens cold and fresh for days, sometimes weeks, without that machine running around the clock and quietly draining your wallet. And the method that does it wasn't dreamed up in some laboratory. It was built by ordinary Australians, in the middle of the desert, with nothing but water, cloth, and a bit of breeze. It came out of the Western Australian goldfields in the 1890s, back when there wasn't a power line for 500 miles in any direction, and a block of ice cost more than a day's wages. Now, there's a quiet thing happening over in America right now. People are unplugging their big freezers, digging cellars back into the ground, going back to the old ways because the cost of everything got too high. And almost nobody has told them, or you, that Australians cracked this exact problem more than 130 years ago, and did it better and cheaper than anything you can buy in a shop today. Before we're done, I'll show you a preserving trick I dug out of a country newspaper from 1915, sitting in the National Trove Archive, that keeps eggs fresh for the better part of a year with no fridge at all. And none of this needs land, or money, or a tradesman. If you're in a little unit in the city, it works just as well for you. I still remember the first time I saw it work. I was out past Dubbo, in an old fella's tin shed, and he pulled a damp cloth off a wooden box hanging in the doorway. Inside was butter, firm and cold, on a day pushing 38 degrees. No power, no ice. I put my hand flat against that box and it was cool as a cave. I didn't say a word for a good minute. I just couldn't work out how. For most of my life, I did everything the expensive way. I had a big fridge in the kitchen, a second fridge in the garage, and a chest freezer beside it that I filled once and forgot about. I thought that was just what living cost. I thought the hum was the sound of doing things properly. I never once questioned it, because nobody around me questioned it either. So when that old bloke near Dubbo, his name was Reg, showed me his cool box, my first reaction was to laugh it off. I thought it was a bit of bush theater. A relic, something old folks kept around for the story. I asked him, half joking, how long it would keep a bit of meat. He looked at me the way you look at a kid who's asked something silly, and he said, "Long enough that I've never owned a fridge, son." That stopped me cold. This man was in his 80s. He'd raised a family on that block, and he had never in his whole life paid to run a refrigerator. Not once. What Reg had was called a Coolgardie safe, and once I learned where it came from, I understood why it worked so well, and why almost nobody talks about it anymore. Go back to 1892. Gold had just been found at Coolgardie, out in the Western Australian desert, and thousands of men rushed in from everywhere. It was one of the hottest, driest, most brutal places you could imagine trying to live. There was no ice, there was barely any water, and meat, milk, and butter would turn rancid within hours in that heat. Men were getting sick, food was being thrown out faster than it could be brought in. A contractor working out there, a man by the name of Arthur Patrick McCormick, worked out something clever. He'd noticed that a wet bag hung over a bottle kept the water inside surprisingly cool. He'd seen the same trick used on wet canvas water bags slung on the front of wagons. So he took that idea and built it bigger. He made a simple frame, like a small cupboard, and covered the sides in hessian, that rough cloth the wheat bags were made from. On the top he set a tray of water. He hung strips of the hessian so one end sat in that water and the other end ran down the sides of the box. The cloth soaked the water up and stayed wet all day long. Then he stood the whole thing where the breeze could reach it. Here's the part that feels like magic but is just plain science. When wind blows across wet cloth, the water evaporates. And when water evaporates, it pulls heat out of everything around it. It's the exact same reason you feel cold stepping out of the surf on a windy day. That soaked Hessian was constantly pulling the heat out of the box, and the breeze was carrying it away. The drier and hotter the wind, the harder it worked. In that desert air, a Coolgardie safe could sit 10, even 15 degrees below the temperature outside. On a 40-degree day, the inside was sitting around a cool cellar temperature. Cold enough to keep butter firm, cold enough to stop milk turning, cold enough to hold meat safely for far longer than you'd ever believe. By the late 1890s, these things were in tents and huts right across the goldfields. Then they spread. By the early 1900s, you would have struggled to find a country kitchen in Australia that didn't have one, either bought or homemade. It kept a nation fed through droughts, through the bush, through 2 world wars and the Great Depression, when nobody could afford to waste a scrap of food or a penny of power. And then it just vanished. Not because it stopped working. It worked perfectly. It vanished for a reason, and that reason is where this story starts to get uncomfortable. Because the moment the electric fridge arrived, something changed. And it wasn't just about convenience. Think about what a Coolgardie safe actually is, from a business point of view. You build it once. It costs you almost nothing. You keep it going with a few liters of water and the wind, both of which are free. It never sends you a bill. It never asks for a monthly payment. It cannot be metered. Nobody can profit from you owning one. Now think about the fridge. That fridge in your kitchen is the single most expensive thing to run in your entire house. It is the one appliance that never switches off. It draws power at 3 in the morning while you're asleep. It draws power when you're away on holidays. It draws power every hour of every day of every year for the 15 or 20 years you own it. In this country right now, the average fridge costs somewhere between $170 and $220 a year to run. That's just one fridge. Add the second one in the garage, the beer fridge, the chest freezer, and plenty of households are quietly handing over $400, $500, $600 a year just to keep motors humming. Over 20 years, that one machine in your kitchen can cost you more to power than it costs to buy. That is a guaranteed, round-the-clock, unstoppable stream of money flowing out of your home and into the power company, and it never, ever stops. And a device that runs on wind and water threatens every cent of it. I'm not telling you to throw your fridge in the tip. I still have mine, but once I understood the numbers, I got a bit angry, if I'm honest, because nobody ever showed me there was another way. I grew up thinking a humming fridge was as natural as the sun coming up, and the reason I thought that is because a lot of people made a lot of money making sure I thought that. The old knowledge didn't die. It was pushed aside, quietly. The advertisements in the 1950s and 60s didn't just sell fridges. They sold shame. They made the Coolgardie safe look like something poor people used, something backward, something you'd be embarrassed to have in a modern kitchen. And it worked. A whole generation was taught to feel sorry for the way their parents had lived and to pay every month for the privilege of forgetting it. But here's what those old country folk knew that we forgot. You don't need to keep everything ice cold. That's the great trick that was played on us. Most of what sits in your fridge doesn't need to be that cold at all. Let me show you what I mean, because this is where it starts to become useful for you, tonight, in the home you already live in. Now, I know exactly what a lot of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, that's lovely for a bloke on a block out past Dubbo, but I'm in a unit. I've got a little balcony or no yard at all. This isn't for me. I want to talk to you especially for the next few minutes, because I was wrong about this, and I'll bet you're wrong about it too. This is the part that changed my mind, and it needs no yard, no shed, no tools, and not a single dollar spent on a tradesman. You do not need a big timber safe hanging in a doorway. The principle is what matters, and the principle fits inside the smallest flat in the country. All you need is evaporation and a bit of moving air. Start with the simplest version there is. Take a terracotta pot, the plain clay kind you'd grow a herb in, the unglazed sort. Soak it in water for an hour until the clay itself is damp all the way through. Sit a smaller container inside it, Put your butter or your cheese or a bit of leftover meat in that, and drape a wet cloth over the top so one edge dips into a saucer of water. Stand the whole lot near an open window where the air moves. That damp clay does exactly what McCormick's Hessian did. The water seeps through the clay, evaporates off the surface, and pulls the heat out of whatever's inside. On a warm day, it'll sit several degrees cooler than your kitchen bench. That's enough to keep butter spreadable and safe, to stop cheese sweating, to hold tomatoes and stone fruit for days. Picture yourself standing at that open window tonight, hand on a cool clay pot, finally understanding why nothing inside it has to spoil. That small win is just the doorway. The complete, permanent version of it lives in the book collection I put together, Aussie Basics, Deep Thrift, and the Full System. In there I walk you step by step through building the old Coolgardie safe cooler from things already in your kitchen, setting up a pantry that stops your food and eggs spoiling before you use them, cutting that round-the-clock fridge drain the way our grandparents did, and preserving a whole glut of eggs and vegetables with no freezer and no fancy gear. You even get printable quick start cards and a preserving calendar you can stick straight on the fridge, and you don't have to take my word for a thing. Do what I did before I trusted it myself. Sit a damp terracotta pot near an open window tonight with a thermometer inside, and watch it read cooler than your kitchen by morning, for nothing at all. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. Every one of these methods costs you almost nothing, and your fridge is running up a bill this very hour, so there's no reason to keep paying for something the old folk did for free. Now, if a cool box can hold butter and greens for days, you might be wondering how they made food last for months, so let me answer the question that kept nagging at me. And here's the thing that really got me. Half the stuff we cram into the fridge shouldn't be in there in the first place. Tomatoes go floury and tasteless in the cold. Onions and garlic rot faster in the damp of a fridge than they ever would in a cool, airy spot. Potatoes turn sweet and gritty. Bread goes stale up to 6 times faster in the fridge than it does sitting on the bench. Honey never needs refrigerating. Most hard cheeses were kept in cellars for centuries, not fridges. The moment you take those things out, you free up so much space that a lot of you could switch the second fridge off completely. That garage fridge alone might be costing you $200 a year to chill a few bottles and some condiments that don't even need it. If you've got a balcony, hang a wet Hessian bag, or even an old cotton pillowcase, over a wire basket or a milk crate. Keep the bottom edge sitting in a tray of water, and let the breeze do the rest. If you're right in the middle of the city with a window that opens onto shade, that's your spot. North-facing and baking hot in the sun is no good. You want shade and moving air. A cool, shaded windowsill with a cross breeze is worth more than the fanciest kitchen in the country when it comes to this. I tried it myself before I ever told a soul about it, because I didn't want to be the fool who repeated an old wives' tale. I put a thermometer inside a damp terracotta setup on my back veranda on a day that hit 34 degrees. The air outside was 34. Inside that little clay cooler, it read 22. 12 degrees cooler, with nothing but a wet pot and the wind. I stood there looking at that thermometer, feeling like I'd been robbed for 40 years and only just noticed. And this isn't just me and my thermometer. Our own scientists have studied exactly this. The principle McCormick used has a proper name now, evaporative cooling. And it's the same science behind those big cooling systems people run in dry inland towns because they're so much cheaper than air conditioning. Work done through Australian research bodies has confirmed that in dry, warm air, evaporative cooling can pull the temperature down by well over 10 degrees, using a tiny fraction of the energy a compressor uses. The old bushmen didn't have the equations. They just had the results. And the results fed this country for generations. But knowing the temperature drops is only half of it. Because the real question, the one that kept nagging at me, was this. How did people actually keep food safe for months, not just days, before refrigeration? A cool box buys you time on butter and greens. But what about the things that spoil the fastest? What about eggs? What about the food that could make you seriously crook if it turned? That's the question that sent me digging into the archives, and what I found there is the part I've been saving for you. Because a cool box is wonderful, but the old folk had a second layer of know-how that went far beyond keeping things cool for a day or two. They knew how to reach into a warm pantry in the middle of winter and pull out an egg laid back in the height of summer and use it like it was fresh that morning. No fridge, no freezer, no power at all. I found it while I was going through the digitized newspapers in the Trove Archive, the collection the National Library keeps of every old paper in the country. I was reading a country paper from 1915. Now think about what was happening then. The Great War had just begun. The men were shipping out. Money was tight and food was tighter, and eggs, which the hens only lay well in the warm months, had to somehow be made to last through the barren winter. And there, printed plain as day between the news from the front and the stock prices, were the instructions. A household method for keeping eggs good for the better part of a year. The method was called water glass, and the moment I read it, I knew this was the finale I'd been chasing. Water glass is a simple, cheap substance called sodium silicate. Back then, every chemist and produce store sold it by the tin, because every household used it. It's still sold today, and it costs next to nothing. Here is exactly what those women did, and exactly what you can do this very weekend. You take a clean bucket, or a big crock, or an enamel pot with a lid. You mix 1 part water glass to about 10 parts of water that you've boiled and let cool. You stir it into a thin, slippery liquid. Then you take your eggs, and this next part matters more than anything. They must be fresh, and they must be unwashed. You do not wash them, because a fresh-laid egg comes with an invisible natural coating on the shell. The old folk called it the bloom, and that coating is the egg's own seal against the outside world. Wash it off and you've ruined the whole thing. You gently lower those clean, dry, unwashed eggs into the water glass solution, pointy end down, until they're fully covered by an inch or two of liquid. Then you put the lid on and stand it somewhere cool and dark. A cupboard. Under the house. In the back of a pantry. What the water glass does is seal every tiny pore in the shell, completely. Air can't get in. Moisture can't get out. Bacteria can't get through. The egg inside is held in a kind of suspended animation, exactly as fresh as the day it went in. And it stays that way for 8, 9, sometimes 12 months. That's a hen's entire summer of laying, captured and held, ready to feed your family right through the winter, on nothing but a tin of cheap powder and a bucket of water. When you want one, you lift it out, rinse it off, and use it like it came from under the hen that morning. The only tip the old-timers passed down is this. Before you boil one, prick a tiny hole in the fat end with a pin, because the sealed shell can crack in boiling water otherwise. For scrambling, baking, frying, you'd never know the difference. This wasn't a fringe trick. This was in the Country Women's Association handbooks. It was printed in newspapers up and down the country. It was standard knowledge in nearly every rural home in Australia for the first half of the 20th century. My own research kept turning it up again and again, the same method, in paper after paper, from before the First War right through to the 1950s. Millions of eggs were preserved this way, and then the fridge arrived, and within a generation it was gone so completely that if you mention it today, most people look at you like you've made it up. But it's real. It's documented. It's sitting right there in the National Archive with a date on it, and it works today exactly as well as it worked in 1915, because a hen's egg hasn't changed, and neither has the chemistry. Think about what that means, sitting where you are. Eggs go on special. You buy them cheap by the dozens, and you keep them fresh for the better part of a year for a couple of dollars worth of water glass. No power, no freezer burn, no waste. The same way a settler's wife did it while her husband was away at the war, using knowledge that had already been handed down to her. And that's the piece they were happiest to let us forget, because a family that can cool its own food with wind and water and preserve a summer of eggs in a bucket in the cupboard is a family that doesn't need to pay someone else every single day for the privilege of eating. That old fella near Dubbo, Reg, he wasn't backward, he wasn't poor, he was free in a way most of us have forgotten how to be. He looked at my 2 fridges and my chest freezer, and he didn't envy me for a second. He knew something I'd spent my whole life not knowing. He knew that the humming in the corner of my kitchen wasn't the sound of progress. It was the sound of a meter ticking over, taking a little more from me every hour for something his grandmother did for free. What you've really got tonight isn't a trick about eggs or a clever box wrapped in wet cloth. What you've got back is a little bit of independence that was quietly taken from you and sold back to you 1 power bill at a time. And I think that matters to you, or you wouldn't have watched this far. You're the kind of person who's never quite believed that the newest and the most expensive is automatically the best. You've always had a feeling that plain, honest, hand-me-down know-how got shoved in a drawer somewhere so that somebody else could keep charging you. Well, you were right, it did. And you've just pulled some of it back out of that drawer. So let me ask you something, and I really do want you to answer this one. Of everything I've shown you tonight, which are you going to try first? Is it the terracotta cooler on the windowsill, or is it the bucket of water glass eggs? Tell me down in the comments. And while you're there, tell me whereabouts in the country you're watching from, because I read every single one, and I love knowing whether I'm talking to someone up in the tropics, out in the dry, or down where the winters bite. If your mom or your nan or an old neighbor ever used one of these methods, I want to hear about it, because that's exactly the knowledge we're saving here. This isn't really a channel. It's a lot of us quietly refusing to let the good old Australian know-how disappear and picking it back up 1 method at a time. If that's the sort of thing you believe in, come and stand with us. Follow along, because I want you here for the next one. And I'll leave you with this, since it's already got me digging back through the archives. Everybody keeps a bag of it in the pantry, most of us for baking, and hardly anyone alive today remembers that our grandparents used the very same cheap white powder to keep meat safe through the hottest part of summer without a scrap of ice or a moment of refrigeration. The paper I found it in even listed the exact amounts. I'll show you the whole thing next time. Don't miss it. Tonight I showed you where the Coolgardie safe came from. But inside the Bush Wisdom Circle, I take you all the way through it, the full build, and that egg-preserving method right where this video left off. Get stuck? Ask me your own question, and I answer you myself, no machine. You won't be alone. Thousands of practical folks are already in there with us. Just point your phone's camera at the code. Cancel any time. I'd love to have you.